Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I am Sid Part 2. Joining me today is...
Me, Steve.
Indeed, me, Steve.
Of the backseat variety.
So, like, you go to a store and you're like, do you have any Steves? And they're like, yeah, what kind of Steves do you want? And you're like, a backseat one?
Exactly.
Okay.
You could buy the Steve Dells and the Steve Orlandos, but, like, they're sort of cheap knockoffs of me.
Gotcha. Okay. I wonder if you've gotten popular enough to have, like, a rip-off YouTube channel that does the exact same thing.
That would require having some sort of brand that isn't just hating everything.
Yeah, true. So I guess, like, you're the knockoff of I Hate Everything.
I guess so, aren't I?
Yeah. You're, like, the more intellectual version of I Hate Everything.
Well, given the way my dad explains my name origin, I was, since conception, a ripoff of Steve McQueen, so there's that.
You're so unoriginal, Steve.
I am. My dad's literally like, ever since he saw a Steve McQueen movie, he's like, that's going to be my kid's name.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And he was right. It turned out to be his kid's name.
Oh, that's so funny. Now, here's the question. Are you, like, a really good driver?
I am. I've never been in an accident, so there's that.
I don't think that not being in an accident makes you a good driver. Like, talented driver, skilled driver, not safe driver.
See, now that's a question we can only answer when we hang out and go on the freeway.
Oh my god, yes, this sounds like an amazing idea. For those that don't know...
This is safe.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Steve's planning to come to my wedding, so that'll be cool.
I am. It's great. I'm going to be fundamentally important to the whole thing.
Yeah, you will, by just being there. Okay. Anyway, this episode immediately got off track. We couldn't, like, fucking record it for weeks on end, and now we start doing it, we're just fucking talking. I mean, sure, it's a podcast, but there's supposed to be a topic, but we just did a review, so now we're in, like, chill chat mode. It's the day, no one's tired. I'm making the problem worse by talking about the problem.
It's like 4 PM. I've got my Batman coffee mug with coffee. Like, it's just one of those things.
Yeah. Steve, what are we supposed to be talking about?
Well, I think we're supposed to be talking about a little-known character from the obscures of the Marvelverse with no-name writers such as Brian Michael Bendis and Ed Brubaker and Frank Miller. Daredevil. We were talking about Daredevil.
Indeed we are. So, Daredevil's a character I've never really gotten into all that much.
Which is kind of why I wanted to talk to you about him. I figured that'd be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, like I watched the series and I've seen him pop up. Like, I know who he is as a comic fan. I'm aware of his existence. But it's just a character that I never got into, which is weird because I like a lot of the characters that surround Daredevil. I like the Kingpin. I like Bullseye. I like Frank Castle. I never really get into Matt Murdock that much, though. I don't know why.
Well, so there are two things about Daredevil that I wanted to talk about specifically with this video, because, like, there's a lot to mention with that character, but there are two particular things that I think define Daredevil as a character that either we never touch on or we don't touch on to the degree I want to touch on. One of them is a thing that's just in my head and makes no sense unless you get it. Like, you either get it or you don't. It's that kind of thing. The first one is guilt, particularly Catholic guilt, because Daredevil is a Catholic, and the whole notion of what guilt is and why it's fundamental to Daredevil and why Daredevil can never be guilt-free. And then the other one is this weird experience you have when you're reading a Daredevil comic, where like you know just from the feel, like you can't quote words, you can't like show panels, but you know just from the feel of reading the comic whether it's going to be a bad story or a good story, because there's like this weird Daredevil experience when you're reading that if a writer doesn't have it, he just doesn't have it. Andy Diggle's run, even when it wasn't awful, didn't have this Daredevil flavor, and then you just knew it was going to go off the rails, and it did.
Interesting, because, like, you know, Daredevil certainly has a cast of characters, but there's only so many, right? You got Elektra, Foggy Nelson, Ben
Karen
Urich.
Page sometimes, Ben Urich.
Yeah, so you got, like, what, 4 or 5, you know, floating characters. Sometimes there's, like, a priest thrown in there. But with, like, even if you don't know how to write Bruce Wayne Batman, you can still tell a good Batman story if you can write a good Commissioner Gordon or a good Dick Grayson or just a good villain. You can tell a good Batman story if you can just write a good villain. Because a lot of this other stuff just falls into place for you. But yeah, I can kind of see what you're saying, where Daredevil has a very particular tone about it, and if you can't really get that, there's not a ton around him to fill in the gaps for you.
Writing Batman, if you want it to be, you can make it a mechanical thing and it's not difficult. Like there's a formula, right? Like it's not impossible to just write Batman based on stereotype of what it is to be Batman.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that's why he's had so many shows. It's part of
exactly. And that's why you can't, that's something you can't really do with Daredevil. There are the two types of Daredevils that Mark Waid kind of merged, which is like the more fun-loving, campier side of Daredevil, and then there's like the hard-boiled, gritty noir sort of Daredevil. But even when he's like fun-loving, jumping on the streets and like climbing bridges and shit, Daredevil, there's still something about him that's like very particular to who he is. I don't, and this is a thing where like you can recast characters to be of different races, to be of different genders and different sexualities and stuff like that, and I'm all for that. Like I think Superman as a black man makes a hell of a lot more sense than Superman as a white dude. Not that it's like one can't have good stories and the other has better stories. It's just that there's different potentials you can explore with that. With Daredevil, with Matt Murdock, there's just a way he speaks. There's a way he engages with the world. There's a way. There's like a level of misogynistic that he kind of is. There's a level of toxic he kind of is. That it kind of makes sense that he's a guilt-ridden Catholic white dude.
Gotcha. And see, it's interesting to write about a character, or to read a character who's so marred in religion, because so many superheroes don't seem religious at all.
They don't seem, or they explicitly aren't, or they explicitly are in ways you can't explain.
Yeah. Like, the only other character that's very inherently religious that I can think of is frickin' Wonder Woman. And she's religious to old Greek gods because that's where her powers come from, right? So, like, Matt Murdock's one of the few, like, Christian characters in comics, and it's a big deal for him to be such. And yet, he does things that are inherently un-Christian.
Yeah, like dressing up as a devil, for example. And this is the thing in Mark Waid's run, because I am one of the only people on the planet that doesn't think Mark Waid's Daredevil run is very good. But one of the principal problems with that run is that Matt Murdock as a Catholic man is never discussed at all. Particularly weird because there's a part of that storyline where someone digs up Matt's father's grave and puts like his dead father's skull in his desk.
And see, that would be a really big problem for him because...
Yeah, like, more than just like the emotional melodrama, there's a religious blasphemy subtext, not even subtext, text to that Mark Waid never mentions.
See, yeah, it's
and you don't do that.
It's hard for me to talk about that because I haven't read the run, so maybe just the act of doing it is enough in the story. If I were to be giving credit to something I'm just hearing about, you've read it, you know better than I do, though. But just Yeah, that is a really fascinating thing, and to play with these religious angles with Matt Murdock. When again, so many characters just aren't. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
Am I the only one that thinks it's really weird in the first Avengers movie where Black Widow tells Cap that guy's basically a god, and he's like, God doesn't dress like that. I'm like, Cap doesn't come off as particularly religious to me. I just don't know if I buy him saying that.
The line something like there's only one God man and he doesn't dress like that.
Yeah, that's just like something about that line. Like, it's a funny line, but it always felt really awkward to me because that sounds like it's coming from someone who's particularly religious, and I don't see that version of Steve Rogers that way.
This is a thing we do with superheroes. We're like, we want superhero comics ever since their inception have been more left-leaning. They are, in a more general, not in an American sense, but in a more general political sense, very liberal things. Mm-hmm. And we will have this tendency to, like, let's just keep leaning into, like, these liberal subject ideas. So, like, Captain America grew up in the 1930s and served in World War II in the 1940s. But, hey, he's not a racist. He's not misogynistic. He's not hyper-religious. Mm-hmm. He's not hyper-nationalist, but why not? Wouldn't he be at least one of those things?
Oh, one of my favorite little parody comics was Captain America dealing with Black Panther, and he's like, listen, I'm not saying he doesn't belong in the Avengers, I'm saying he should have his own Avengers team, just like he should have his own bathroom. It's so fucked up, but that's exactly how he'd think if he were an actual guy from the 40s.
See, yeah, exactly. It's like these things where, like, we want to keep making superheroes human, but we don't want them to, like, be human in any particular way.
Mm-hmm. And Matt Murdock's kind of an exception to that, isn't he?
Yeah, Matt Murdock's one of those characters where, like, he always kind of gets in his own way, and all of his stumblings are, like, very personal, very deeply rooted in that. Like, he lost his law license. Someone took all the money out of his bank account. His girlfriend died. He feels bad because he did something that goes against his religious code. It's that kind of thing. Like, and it's not that other superheroes don't have this, but, like, there's something that's, like, deeply one-sidedly human about it in a way that other superheroes try to be. We write very particular characters as being like, this is them, but everyone can see themselves as them. Everyone cannot see themselves as Matt Murdock. They're not supposed to.
And see, it would be really interesting to see someone just do nothing but the religious side of Matt Murdock for a run. I would read a run, and tell me if this exists. I would read a run where we see Matt Murdock confront situations that are more or less identical to tales from the Bible, and see how he deals with it opposed to how the Bible tells you should deal with a situation like that.
There are singular issues about this. There's very rarely, if ever, anything like this. Daredevil Born Again, because literally Born Again concept is the most religious, most overtly religious a lot of this stuff gets, because, like, every chapter is very particularly referencing things from the Bible and has, like, a very particular Daredevil is having, as a person, a renewed spiritual awakening and stuff like that. But, like, never so that explicitly. Like, in my head, I've always thought of if I wrote a Daredevil run, it would be about the Catholic Church. It would be about what Matt Murdock feels about it. It would be about confronting whether or not he thinks he's justified in doing what he does. It will be about whether or not he's a good Catholic and why he feels guilty for no apparent reason about most things.
Yeah, that'd be really fascinating. And it'd also just be interesting to see, in a run like that, in a run that deals very heavily paralleling with religion, how he reacts to someone like Thor.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any, like, particular, I'm sure they've shared panels together, but I'm not aware of anything with Matt Murdock reacting to the existence of a literal deity.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm weird with Daredevil. I have this thing where, like, if I'm going to read any Daredevil, I compulsively need to, like, go back and read all of Daredevil, but I only read Daredevil in his book. Like, I don't read Daredevil in Avengers. I don't read Daredevil in like, Defenders. Daredevil is a team-up character, does not exist for me. He is in his book, and that's my character. And like, I'm not that way with any other Marvel character. Like, I will read Iron Man and Avengers. I'll read Iron Man and like West Coast and shit like that. But like, Daredevil is in his own book. He's in his own little pocket. He's his own little person.
Which is so weird because he's so connected to all these other big names in the Marvel universe. Like I said, Kingpin, Frank Castle,
Exactly.
Spider-Man, even.
Exactly. And like, I just don't give a shit about it. I don't give a shit about Ultimate Daredevil, and I read pretty much everything Ultimate published for a while. I do not give any shits about the Defenders TV show coming out.
Oh, really? Even after... Oof. Ouch.
Yeah, like, it's nothing against it, because I love Jessica Jones, I loved Luke Cage, I loved the first season of Daredevil, but like, Daredevil as a team player, I don't care. I want Matt Murdock on his own, dealing with his own stuff.
That's fascinating. And like... I don't know, Matt Murdock's a really interesting idea for a character that, like, this is Stan Lee when he's actually being creative.
Yeah.
And Stan Lee gets too much credit, of course, but this is something that I buy he came up with, where he's like, he's told this story I've heard where he goes, we've always had, like, okay, well, this character needs a secret identity, so I'm going to make them a reporter so they can be part of the thing, like, they can run into the danger or whatever. And making Matt Murdock a lawyer is just a really interesting idea and very, very clever. And so it's weird for me that you don't read Matt in Team Up, because making him a lawyer was partially designed so that he could pair for Team Ups easier.
And they do this in Alias. They do this in Jessica Jones, where she has because this is when Bendis is on his kick of writing everything that's amazing. So he's writing his Daredevil run and he's writing Alias at the same time. And he has an issue where, like, part of that run is Matt Murdock's identity gets exposed, so he has to hire Jessica Jones as a bodyguard. And so there is a week of comics where you get an Alias issue and you get a Daredevil issue, and the issue is Jessica Jones goes to Matt Murdock's office to guard his door, and if you read the Alias issue, it's her standing outside talking to Luke Cage, and if you read the Daredevil issue, it's him inside the office having conversations. And that's kind of cool. But it's not really a team up because it's just like circumstantially she's standing in the background.
That's funny. Well, no, just like it's interesting though that you don't think he works as a team up character, because part of Stan Lee's original intention in making him a lawyer is, well, now if I ever write a case where like a superhero needs like a lawyer, I can have this guy come in.
See, and if I ever wrote for Marvel, I'd be the dick that's like, so superhero needs a lawyer, who do we go to? Oh, She-Hulk. But there's this other guy. Yeah, I know, but She-Hulk.
Yeah, I know, and I love him, but She-Hulk.
Exactly. Yeah. No, he's my third favorite superhero of all time, but She-Hulk.
That's hilarious. So I don't know. That's really fascinating, and I just think that is one of Stan Lee's real strokes of brilliance, is making him a lawyer, because it's so different, and he experiences a completely different side of the criminal justice system than literally every other superhero.
Yeah,
because
he's not a prosecutor. He's a defense attorney. It's really interesting that like he doesn't work for the government, and a lot of his criminals are the ones that are being very intentionally oppressed by the system.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that is a incredibly interesting aspect of the character, and that you could almost see. I'm sure they've done this in stories, and if they haven't, it's a really missed opportunity. Have there ever been anything where like a superhero, quote unquote, caught the bad guy, but turns out they just got the wrong person and just had the same biases that the system has against people, and Matt Murdock got them off?
Yep, there is a story where like they have to prosecute a criminal, but like it doesn't work out because the person's innocent. And then Bendis also has a story where a superhero is being prosecuted and Matt has to defend him, and spoiler alert, but Bendis' run's like 17 years old now, so whatever. So Matt Murdock actually loses the case because the superhero just does shit that the public doesn't like. Like, Bendis does a very particular thing when he's writing lawyer Daredevil, where he's like, I can't just take a case. It has to be about, what does the public think? Can you get something that's close to an unbiased jury? How am I able to spin this? If people know my secret, will they sway one way with me or not? Can I actually investigate this as Daredevil? Like, he has this whole thought process of how he accepts a case that's not even really that's almost not even relegated to whether or not the person's innocent sometimes.
Oh wow.
And Frank Miller has a thing. If you ever watch the Daredevil DVD special features, it's got some of the best special features of a superhero DVD ever. It's got this 9-part documentary called Men Without Fear that goes through. It has Stan Lee. It has John Romita Sr. It has what's his name? I'm actually looking it up online just to make sure. It's got John Romita Jr., it's got Gene Cole, it's got Frank Miller, it's got Joe Quesada, it's got Brian Michael Bendis, it's got Kevin Smith, and it's got David Mack. So it's got all of these big-name Daredevil writers and artists, and they just go through one by one for like about 10 to 20 minutes a piece of how they feel about Daredevil and who he is and how their process is in writing or drawing him. And Frank Miller makes a really interesting point where he says Daredevil is the only superhero known for what he can't do, which is he's blind.
Yeah. And, it's funny, Rasko and I do the fan film reviews, and I'm working on this audio drama for Rotlop Fan, the blind Green Lantern. Someone, seriously, draw me Matt Murdock, Rotlop Fan, and Geordie LaForge hanging out, please. I need this in my life. But, like, I was looking for another fan to see if anyone else had done a fan audio project of Daredevil. I don't know why that's not a thing. I don't know why Marvel doesn't do this. Why don't they do an audio drama with Daredevil?
The whole, the fact that Daredevil's blind is one of the coolest things about him. When the first season of the show came out, Charlie Cox got an award from the American Blind Institute, I think, something like that, for the way he played him as a blind character, and he did the thing where, he holds his thumb inside the rim of a glass to see how much it's being filled up, or the way he folds his bills, or, the way he walks into his house. Every episode's always the same.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Stuff like that's really interesting. And Netflix did a really cool thing when they started unveiling audio commentary for the visually impaired with Daredevil.
Yeah. And that just made sense. I don't know why they didn't launch with that, but just in general, I think that's a thing that, obviously you couldn't do it too much, but it's fundamentally cheaper than animated movies and stuff. Because all you need is voice actors, a writer, and an editor.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about, the auditory experience of Daredevil that's really fascinating. And this contributes to that whole being able to write with a Daredevil flavor. But we just don't, I don't know if it's not that we don't do it, it's that we just don't think about it on those terms. There are people that understand when they're writing Daredevil, regardless of how much you're seeing, they're writing a character that's blind. And then there are people that don't seem to get that. Oh. Even if they get that, they don't get that.
Are there any infamous panels of Matt Murdock saying, "I just can't see it," like using visual metaphor in his speaking?
See, that would be the best thing ever. They're pretty consistent about it, but I don't know. It's that weird thing between understanding something and being able to write it that way. Where Michael Lark's my favorite Daredevil artist. Not for any particular reason other than just the way he makes Daredevil move and stuff. But Daredevil moves and operates, as opposed to Matt Murdock, Daredevil moves and operates as if he's not blind. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean he isn't. And just because you can see everything, and just because everything's on the page, or just because everything's described to you, you shouldn't make him act like he's not blind. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just that weird thing where, I don't know how you control that, but when you do, you have that flavor.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting because I remember at one point, I think it was someone talking about Frank Miller taking over Daredevil, and someone said something to the effect of, you have one of the strangest characters in the Marvel Universe where we have a blind man who jumps off rooftops and somehow doesn't die. And that's just fundamentally, there's something silly about that, but Frank Miller made it work. And I think a lot of people have picked up and run with it since then. And so it's interesting to both empower a character that is blind, because people tend to think of disability as making you useless, and you're lucky that you're still around at all, kind of thing. Right. To take that and actively make it into a character or part of a character that uses it uses that kind of disability to their advantage to do incredible things in the Marvel universe. Like, Daredevil doesn't have any super physical powers or anything like that. He is just blind, and he's, you know, trained really well to deal with it. That's inherently fascinating.
And his only superpower is that quote unquote radar sense, which it varies from writer to writer, but in my head I always think of it as it's the name you give to the experiences you have when all four of your senses are heightened because you have lost one of them. So the fact that his touch and his smell and his hearing and his taste are heightened, all of them kind of form together to give him a type of radar. And he can do things that normal blind people can't. We're like, sure, he can't read a poster, but if he moves his hand, he can feel the ink's impressions and kind of understand what it's saying. Mm-hmm. So, like, he's got powers, but they're really, really minor. And sometimes we ramp them up to the point where him being blind doesn't completely make sense anymore either as a crutch. But then the better stories are the ones where we don't do that. We're like, the fact that he can't see is integral to how he's experiencing certain things. Like the Bendis run, which is my favorite run on Daredevil, does a really cool thing where, like, Daredevil can't see, but, like, so much of there's an entire issue that's entirely without word balloons, and it's just him silently running and chasing after someone. And then when the FBI finds out Daredevil is Matt Murdock, they don't say it, they draw it. So you see things you're not hearing or listening to things.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So, like, just... Again, I don't know how you consciously think of these things, but when you do and when you get it, there's a flavor for Daredevil that just isn't in anything else.
That's cool. Yeah.
And all of this ignoring stuff like the hand and Elektra. I like Elektra. I like her as a foil and a part of Matt's story. I can do without the ninja bullshit. I don't care about the hand. Every time the hand shows up, the story is inherently less interesting.
Really?
Yeah, it's a thing. Every Daredevil run, like, starts in this place of really hard-boiled noir detective thing, and then somewhere along the middle or the end becomes a hand story, and then that disappears.
That's disappointing.
Yeah,
I don't
know.
The ninja shit with Daredevil. I'm perfectly okay with he just, you know, like, I would actually, maybe this, like, the controversial, I'd be totally okay with taking away the martial arts and just making him a boxer. Like, his fighting style is just boxing.
I would prefer that. I would prefer also just more discussion of who Matt is and who his dad is, because Frank Miller added stuff where, like, his dad was drunk and kind of physically abusive to his son, but nothing to, like, a horrible degree. I would, like, if I was writing Daredevil, I'd go run all the way with that. Let's really think about this for a second of, like, the kind of toxically masculine ideal that Matt thinks is a good father. Because his dad's a shitty dude. There's really no way around it.
Mm-hmm. But yet he idolizes him.
Exactly. And why? Why is that? Simply because his dad existed? Is that enough, really?
His dad existed and he lost him, I guess, would be the thinking behind it. But it doesn't... It's that viewing... Sorry. It's that... Goddamn, I can't do this without visual metaphor. Fuck it. It's that viewing things through nostalgic glasses, rose-colored lenses, right?
Exactly.
And
it's not that his dad didn't do okay shit, but he was a bad person.
Yeah, I mean,
he was. There's you can't avoid that.
He worked for criminals. He was like, you know, there's... Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt's mother left his father, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, there's a reason that happened.
Yeah, which Mark Waid has a story about, where it's like post-birth depression and that kind of thing. But Born Again also has a thing with that, where, like, it's very much about who Matt's dad is and why she couldn't be with him and stuff like that.
And yet I bet you that Matt probably blames his mom for that more than he does his father.
Yeah, more than likely, because he spent all that time with his dad. And Daredevil, the Netflix show, makes his dad a better person, but he's still, like, a very traditional, toxically masculine kind of ideal, and so is Matt. And I would never say Matt Murdock's a good person, but he understands that about himself more than he seems to understand it about his dad. Again, there's really interesting, like, complexes here. Frank Miller injected a lot of like Freudian style psychoanalysis into Daredevil. So then everyone just kind of ran with it. Like literally his girlfriend's name is Elektra. Like that comes from Greek myth, that comes from Electra complex, Oedipus complex. It's that kind of thing where like you can't help but get super introspective about it.
I'm trying to remember, was Elektra the character in Greek myth who like went crazy and killed her husband and children and stuff?
She killed her children, I think. She killed her dad.
Okay.
It's a reverse Oedipus thing, but it's also I haven't read the myth in a really long time, but like there's a whole thing with like her parentage is kind of fucked up, and like her dad raped her mom, and she killed her mom at one point and fell in love with her dad and then killed her dad. It's a very confusing thing, but all Greek myths kind of are.
Yeah. Electra, Greek myth. Was the daughter of King Gamaran and Queen Kalamravura, and thus Princess of Argos. She and her... Okay, yeah, so she's the one that married the guy, and he brought her to Greece, and then he's like...
Yes.
And then he fucking left her ass while she was in Greece. Okay.
Yeah.
That was the misogyny of Greek myth.
Yeah. Which there's a lot of.
Yeah, but no, you're right. That is... It's really ham-fisted, but in the best possible comic booky way.
Yeah. Like you wouldn't want it to be anything less than that kind of fucked up.
Yeah, totally. I mean, if otherwise, what's the point of even reading the story, right?
Exactly. And of course he has to call himself Daredevil and have in that famous image of him hanging on a cross. Like that's just what we're doing here. We're hyper-literalizing psychological disorders.
Exactly. Now, something that I think is kind of interesting, but I don't really feel like I see it explored, at least not in... maybe it's explored in the comics, but it doesn't seem to be explored too much in other media, so I'm unaware of it. But with a name like Daredevil, it seems like there should be a bit of a thrill-seeking kind of flourish to what he's doing beyond just the fighting criminals and the grittiness.
Yeah, and that's there.
Okay, so there is like there's a sense of him doing the stuff because it's also fun.
There's a thing in the Frank Miller run where like his life's kind of fallen apart, but the issue opens with him just smiling and like running on a bridge. And it might be in the Miller run where like there's a very particular comic where he makes the case that when he jumps off of a building, he doesn't actually know how he's going to stop from falling. But he figures it out.
Oh, now I want to read Matt Murdock and Hal Jordan hanging out, because that's perfect.
Yeah, and I mean, Matt Murdock's also a womanizer. He loves women. He loves sex. Like, he's a very particular kind of jerky dude, but also very charmingly so.
And so it'd be interesting to, like, combine all this and make the thrill-seeking nature of what he does as a superhero kind of... to make him kind of see it as sinful.
Yeah, and root it in the fact that he feels guilty all the time. So, like, he's actively kind of a shitty person because he thinks everything... because, like, underlyingly he sort of hates himself and he sort of manifests that as being a really cool person. There's just stuff there. Like, there's a side of Daredevil that's a blind dude, but with really cool sunglasses, a cane, in a suit, with combed back hair, dancing with women, and just, like, enjoying things, that then turns into violently toxic, beating the crap out of people, dressed as a devil, hates life itself kind of person.
Yep.
And they're not separated.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know. There's just it's a Daredevil aesthetic. There's just something to that that's very particular and very interesting in a way that a lot of other comic characters don't have in this, essentially this very raw way.
Nice. Okay. Fascinating character, and I do want to get more into him, but I don't know if I'm going to start reading Daredevil comics just yet. I think I'm going to...
Yeah, and that's the thing. The other thing with Daredevil is, like, I can't just say, well, read this 2-3 issue arc. I'll be like, no, sit down, spend a few days and read this 70 issue run.
Oh, comic books. Are there any good let's introduce a segment on this series. is there anything that like you would say go to this short, easily digestible thing to get a really good picture of this character? Like if we were to do an episode on Larfleeze, I would say go read the Larfleeze Christmas special.
If you want a snapshot of who Daredevil is as a person and like why people should read him or where that goes, there are two things that come to mind. The first is just watch the first episode of the Netflix show.
Uh-huh.
I think the first episode of the Netflix show is the perfect distillation of everything that is Daredevil.
Okay.
But if you actually want a comic, then I'd say pick up Daredevil 184. Daredevil 184 it's a particular story at the end of a story arc where Bullseye's sitting in the hospital, and like Elektra's dead, Daredevil's life is kind of like falling apart, and he's recounting the story about meeting the Punisher and this kid, and he's playing Russian roulette with him as he's telling him the story.
Oh, okay. Cool.
It's a really interesting thing, but like, and the twist of the story, spoiler alert, is that the gun's not actually loaded. But like, it's a really interesting thing where he's like just sitting there talking to Bullseye, and you understand why Daredevil Bullseye have a particular relationship. You understand why Daredevil isn't the Punisher and why he hates the Punisher. You understand that Daredevil and Matt Murdock is a shitty person, but he knows he's a shitty person. It's a very good like psychological snapshot because it's an entirely introspective issue.
Cool. All right. I'm watching through Superman the Animated Series. So I think next week we're going to talk about Brainiac.
Ooh, I thought you were going to go for Darkseid because of the previous conversation. But yes, I love Brainiac. We talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, Darkseid's pretty cool too, but I feel like talking about Brainiac.
Cool.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Brainiac next time. See you whenever that happens, folks. We're going to try to get this series back on track.
We'll try to be consistent. It's more of a scheduling thing on my end, but we'll get there.
We will make it happen. All right. So, until next time, I'm the Philosopher.
And I'm the Exile.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen. And we will be discussing things.